In this video, we're going to start the KutaSoftware Infinite Algebra 1 free worksheet solving quadratic equations by factoring. Our directions are to solve each equation by factoring. And if you don't know how to factor, please refer back to a previous KutaSoftware worksheet that I've completed where you factor quadratic equations, not necessarily solving, but we're factoring them. And I'll leave a link in the description below so you know how to access each of those videos. And number 1, we already have our quadratic factored. It's factored into k plus 1 and k minus 5. Each of those quantities multiplied together will equal 0. But let's think about how a number equals 0. 0 times any number, so if k plus 1, if that quantity is 0, then 0 times k minus 5 equals 0. And let's look at if k minus 5 is 0. Then k plus 1 times 0 equals 0. So in order to solve, we know that k plus 1 equals 0 or k minus 5 equals 0. So if k plus 1 is equal to 0, our k value, when we subtract 1 from both sides, our k value will be equal to negative 1. So negative 1 plus 1 is 0, and 0 times k minus 5, negative 1 minus 5, is equal to 0, because 0 times any quantity is 0. Now let's look at if k minus 5 is equal to 0. We're going to add 5 to both sides to get that k is equal to 5. So 5 minus 5 is 0, k plus 1 times 0, 5 plus 1, which would be 6 times 0 equals 0. So we have two solutions in number 1. K can be equal to negative 1 and k can equal 5. So I'm going to write my answer in set notation. So k is negative 1 and k is 5 for number 1. When k is either of those numbers, this equation will indeed equal 0. And number 2, again, we have our quadratic already factored. So we're going to look at when a plus 1 is equal to 0 and when a plus 2 is equal to 0. Because whenever either of those quantities equals 0, 0 times any number is 0. So a plus 1 equals 0 and a plus 2 equals 0. Solving that first equation, we'll subtract 1 from each side to get that a equals negative 1. Solving that second equation, we'll subtract 2 from each side to get that a equals negative 2. So our solutions for a in set notation is either negative 1 or negative 2. So a can be both negative 1 and negative 2 in order to solve the quadratic in number 2. And this quadratic is a factored quadratic. In number 3, 4k plus 5 equals 0 to make this equation true, or k plus 1 equals 0. So when 4k plus 5 equals 0, we'll subtract 5 from both sides to get that 4k is equal to negative 5. Now we'll divide by 4 to get that k is equal to a negative 5/4. So when k is negative 5/4, 4k plus 5 is equal to 0. And 0 times k plus 1 will equal 0. Let's look at when k plus 1 is 0. When k plus 1 is equal to 0, we'll subtract 1 from both sides to get that k is equal to negative 1. So when k is negative 1 plus 1 is equal to 0, and 0 times 4k plus 5 equals 0. So my two solutions in number 3 are negative 5/4 and negative 1. And number 4, I can have that 2m plus 3 equals 0, or I can have that 4m plus 3 equals 0. So when 2m plus 3 equals 0, I'll subtract 3 from both sides to get that 2 times m equals negative 3. And then I'll divide by 2 to isolate my m, so I'll have that m is equal to negative 3/2. Now let's look at when 4m plus 3 is equal to 0. I'll subtract 3 from both sides to get that 4m equals negative 3. And then when I divide by 4, I'll get that m is equal to negative 3/4. So my solution in number 4 is negative 3/2 and negative 3/4. When m equals either of those, we have solved the quadratic. In number 5, my quadratic is no longer factored, so I'm going to need to factor in order to solve. First, let's get the quadratic set to where it's equal to 0. So I'm going to do so by adding 5 to both sides. So I'll have x squared minus 11x plus 19 plus 5, which is 24. That is equal to 0. Now I'm going to factor x squared minus 11x plus 24. And remember, if you refer back to factoring quadratic equations, we need to find two numbers that multiply to give me 24 and add to give me a negative 11. So if we write out the factors of 24, we'll have 1 and 24, but there's no way to add those to get negative 11. We have 2 and 12. 2 plus 12 does not equal negative 11, or negative 2 plus negative 12. Negative 2 minus 12 also does not equal negative 11. Because remember, since 24 is positive, my factors have to multiply together to equal 24. So either both are positive or both are negative. Let's look at the next two, 3 and 8. If both 3 and 8 are negative, negative 3 plus negative 8 equals a negative 11. So I'll be able to have x minus 3 and x minus 8 as my factors of x squared minus 11x plus 24, and that all is equal to 0. X minus 3 times x minus 8, I would get x squared minus 11x plus 24. Now x minus 3 equals 0, or x minus 8 equals 0 in order for this equation to equal 0. So if x minus 3 is equal to 0, I'll add 3 to both sides to get that x is equal to a positive 3. And if x minus 8 equals 0, I'll add 8 to both sides to get that x is equal to a positive 8. So my solutions to this quadratic equation in number 5 are 3 and 8. And go ahead and double check on your calculator. If you want to use this very original, when you plug in positive 3 for x and solve out this left-hand side, you'll get negative 5. Or if you plug in 8 for x, you'll solve out that left-hand side and also get negative 5. Or you can plug them into this equation, x squared minus 11x plus 24. Plugging 3 in for x or 8 in for x will give you 0 as your solution. In number 6, we're going to subtract 5 from both sides in order to get that quadratic equal to 0 so that we can factor and solve. So I'll have n squared plus 7n plus 10 equal to 0. So I have to find out what multiplies to give us 10 and adds to give us a positive 7. Well, writing out some of the factors of 10, we have 1 and 10, and then 2 and 5. 2 plus 5 does indeed equal 7. So I'll have n plus 2 and n plus 5 equal to 0. So that means that n plus 2 is equal to 0, or n plus 5 is equal to 0. So if n plus 2 equals 0, I'll subtract 2 from both sides to get that n is equal to negative 2. If n plus 5 equals 0, I'll subtract 5 from both sides to get that n is equal to negative 5. So my solutions in number 6 are negative 5 and negative 2. Both of those are solutions to the quadratic in number 6. In number 7, I have n squared minus 10n plus 22 equals negative 2. So I'm going to add 2 to both sides in order to get this quadratic equal to 0 so that I can factor and solve. So n squared minus 10n plus 24 equals 0. So what two numbers multiply to give me 24 and add to give me a negative 10? So since they multiply to give me a positive 24 and add to give me a negative 10, I know those factors are going to be negative in order to add to negative 10. So for 24, we'll start with 1 and 24. Negative 1 plus negative 24 does not equal negative 10. So I'll move on to 2 and 12. Negative 2 plus negative 12 equals negative 14. So that does not equal negative 10. 3 and 8. Negative 3 plus negative 8 equals negative 11. Moving on to 4 and 6. Negative 4 plus negative 6 does indeed equal negative 10. So I'll have n minus 4 and n minus 6 as my factors of this quadratic. So those factors are equal to 0. So that means that the quantity n minus 4 equals 0, or the quantity n minus 6 equals 0. So when n minus 4 equals 0, we'll add 4 to both sides to get that n is equal to a positive 4. When n minus 6 equals 0, we'll add 6 to both sides to get that n is equal to a positive 6. So my solution in number 7, solving this quadratic, n is equal to 4 and n is equal to 6. And lastly, in this video, I'll go over number 8. To start, we're going to have to subtract 6 from both sides. So that'll give us that n squared plus 3n minus 18 equals 0. So now I have to find what two numbers multiply to give me a negative 18 and add to give me a positive 3. So that means that one of the factors of 18 is going to be negative. So that's 1 and 18. Regardless of which is negative, they will never add to positive 3. So let's look at 2 and 9. Regardless of which of those numbers is negative, they will not add to positive 3. And then let's look at 3 and 6. In this case, if the 3 is negative, negative 3 times 6 is a negative 18, and negative 3 plus 6 is a positive 3. So my factors are n minus 3 and n plus 6. So when n minus 3 equals 0, we'll be able to solve this quadratic. And when n plus 6 equals 0, that's another solution to this quadratic. So I'll add 3 to both sides in my first equation. So n is equal to 3 is one solution, and then when I subtract 6 from both sides of my other equation, n is equal to negative 6 is my other solution. So in number 8, my solution is 3 and negative 6. And with that, I'll wrap up this video. Join me in the next video where I'll complete the next 8 problems, numbers 9 through 16. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments below. And as always, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share.